Hello and welcome. My name is Bill Reeks, and I lead a company called the Gramercy Institute. And it pleases me very much to share with you that we have a series of expert panel discussions called Agency Brilliance. And each week, for 4 weeks, we bring to our industry, the financial services marketing industry, a new and different panel on a different subject, all related to financial services marketing, and all with involving massive amounts of agency brilliance. And that said, today is no exception to this. And we have with us, in fact, I won't steal my own thunder. I'm going to introduce them in a moment. But before I do, let me tell you a little bit more about what we're talking about today. We're talking about mapping the customer journey and in financial services marketing. And this is a topic that has gained a healthy head of steam over the past several years. I think what we may hear from our panelists is it's not a brand new concept, but the energy and the vigor with which especially financial services firms are embracing journey mapping has never been as strong. And again, don't ask me though. You can hear it from our panelists. If during the course of this discussion, we'll go on for about an hour. If during the course of this discussion, if any viewers wish to pose a question, please feel free to use the toggle buttons at the bottom to simply ask a question. And as long as I can get to it, it would be my pleasure to do so. And then before taking one more step forward, I wish to give a big heartfelt thanks to our sponsors. They are Dianomi, Investing Channel, and Additions Financial. And there's no coincidence that that is the very Additions Financial from one of our panelists that you will be hearing from in a moment, Kevin Hearn. And maybe that said, let me start with you, Kevin. And Kevin Hearn. We have two Kevins today. Mm-hmm. And Kevin Hearn, I will ask you to kindly introduce yourself to us. Tell us a little bit more about your agency, and I'm putting that in quotes. I'll let you describe what it is that you do at Additions Financial, and maybe a little bit about your background as well. Kevin?
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Bill. So yeah, I'm Kevin Hearn. I'm Director of Strategy for Additions Financial. We are a specialist content marketing agency focused almost entirely on financial services. Based in the UK and in New York, and we essentially help clients find a unique voice for their content, and then help them bring that voice to life through relevant content that hopefully helps fuel effective customer journeys. I'm trying to do a nice little link there. On a personal basis, I've been with Additions, I think, for 9 years now. Worked with some great accounts. We work with large multinational corporate banks, asset managers, private banks, insurers, and it's although you might think a lot of the sort of areas that they cover are very similar, there's lots of great differences to find, and finding those differences is what's the fun part of being a strategist, really.
Well, it's terrific to have you on board. Thank you very much for your participation in this panel. And let's move on. And I'll call on the next. I won't call him the other Kevin. I'm going to call him the next Kevin. Kevin Steen, if you would be kind enough to tell us a little bit more about yourself and about your agency and what you guys specialize in and your point of view, I would appreciate it.
Sure, and I'm fine being the other Kevin. So I'm Kevin Steen. I'm a principal at Sullivan, an agency here in New York City. And we focus on primarily financial services, but also other verticals that have complex decision processes. So technology, professional services, higher education, some non-for-profit as well. I have been at the agency for many years, 16 years, but also prior to that, I worked on the client side. So I'm very familiar with asset management, retirement, with kind of how it is to work on that side of the fence as well. We as an agency focus on really 4 main deliverables or main kind of initiatives. So branding, customer experience, sales enablement, and also employer branding and employee experience. So you can see how journey mapping would really thread across all of those areas.
Well, Kevin, thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to your thoughts and opinions on this very subject. I'll move on to you, Lynda Koster, if I may. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and about your company, your background, what you guys do, whatever you care to share with us. Oh, you're on mute.
I knew I was going to do that. I actually prepped to unmute myself. I forgot. My name is Lynda Koster, and I'm co-founder and managing partner at Growthential. We're a growth marketing company really focused on creating actionable strategies to drive growth for our clients. We really founded the company really based on my experience along with my partner with companies really grappling with how to really meld their brand and marketing chops with the new data, technology, and innovation operations innovations. So we focus on financial, also healthcare, and we have deep expertise within travel and hospitality as well. So really happy to be here. It's a great group of panelists. So thanks for inviting me.
It is our pleasure to have you, and thank you very much, Lynda, for joining us. I'll move on to you, Tabra, if I may, and please tell us a little bit more about yourself, about White Marble. Anything else you care to share?
Thanks, Bill. Great to be here with a fantastic bunch of panelists alongside me. So my name is Tabra Trezise. I head up the digital team at White Marble. We are a marketing consultancy who focuses exclusively on the investment management industry. So mainly asset managers and wealth managers as our clients. And we have a brilliant blend of specialists working our business across brand, content, creative, digital, of course, sustainability as well. We have an office in London and an office in Boston. I myself have a broad background in digital. I have a background in digital strategy, e-commerce, online servicing, and I'm a UX and web specialist as well. And some of the projects that I tend to work with clients on are things like segmenting their market, transforming their website experiences, and also helping them harness the power of their marketing automation platforms to drive lead generation and lead nurturing. So you can see how customer journey mapping would be a key tool in my arsenal.
Indeed, I can. So listen, thank you so much for joining us. And let's move on to you, our final panelist to introduce. Jeffrey Hill, would you please tell us a little bit more about yourself, your agency, and what you guys do?
Yep, thanks, Bill, and it's great to be here. Yeah, I head up our marketing and advertising team here at Markit Digital. I also function as a strategic account director across many clients. I guess one thing to note is sort of our advertising team is part of a larger Markit Digital team. And I'll go into that in 1 second, but our specific advertising team, we act as an agency of record. We also have what we call agency services when we're partnering with other agencies to provide solutions. And we also work to tailor a lot of our sort of larger Markit Digital clients, customer or user experience with personalization and other sort of data and segmentation strategies. Markit Digital as a whole builds, their main clients are all of the brokers out there, asset managers, banks, research firms. We provide most of the tools, the research, the sort of the investor experience to a vast majority of users in the US and probably Canada as well. So Markit Digital itself is about a 500-person company. Our advertising team is smaller than that. It's less than 20. But yeah, we were created to really take what the larger Markit Digital sort of experience was and add a marketing and sort of a unique personalized customer experience for those clients and with both paid advertising and bringing in a lot of the sort of traditional audience and marketing data that you would expect, supplementing that with our own sort of behavioral and internal sort of investor, advisor, sort of all these different types of institutional data that we have available.
Terrific. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your introduction. And let's begin with our topic. And Kevin Steen, I'll start with you if I may. There we go. And I wanted to ask you, of course, there's an easy way to ask this question, and why is this even a panel? But the real question at hand is, what is customer journey mapping, and why is it important? Why should we be talking about it right now in the financial services marketing industry?
It's a big question, and I'm sure all of my panelists can weigh in on that as well. I think really just looking at interactions across every part of the decision-making process, and there can be different phases of that. It could be the early prospecting part of it. It could be once someone has raised their hand, and this is more on the consumer side, and is going through that nurturing process. It could be onboarding once they decide to become a client, or then continuing to build out the relationship once they become a client. I think for financial services, it's incredibly important. It's been important for years. It's funny, our founder founded the company 30 years ago and was basically on this premise. Like, she felt like she wasn't getting the right level of agency support when she was on the client side, that really focused on this sort of, once you're in the funnel, like getting that level of strategic thinking to really analyze like what clients need at different, or sales folks, or on the B2B side as well, like what people need at every stage of the journey. So she was doing this, and then it was what collateral, or what fact sheets, or what phone calls, or when she founded the company. And as obviously now things have evolved dramatically, the decision-making process is not nearly as linear. There are many different touch points and factors involved in making these decisions, particularly in financial services. You may have some of the larger firms we work with. A customer may be working with the bank as well as a wealth management division. They might be interacting with different brands or different lines of business. So how does that all come together with technology, with marketing, communications, with sales or client service, and really making sure that it's a positive experience, and you're obviously pushing people through that decision-making process in a effective way.
So, Kevin Steen, it has become more complex, right? Lately. Does that make the work of the expert in customer journey mapping more needed or more necessary than before?
I think absolutely. I mean, I think obviously there's so much more data you can pull from. Again, the journeys themselves, the customers are pulling on so many different, there's so much out there, there's so many choices out there. So I think it's essential to really bring that expertise to bear. And on the other side of it, you can also get so wrapped up in it, and it can become overwhelming if you're trying to look at every possible scenario. And you need to really kind of find the right balance there in terms of it not boiling the ocean. Is kind of the cliche, but it's very easy to get into that territory when you're doing journey work.
Yeah. Kevin, thank you very much for that. Lynda, Koster, let me ask you, is there anything you'd like to add as we sort of open up this discussion on customer journey mapping from a more definitional point of view? But B, or a follow-up question, is I wanted to ask you about the complexities of journey mapping and how technology plays a part in either to complicate it further or to make it a lot more easy to understand.
That's a really great question. So to build on what Kevin was saying, I think one of the things while we're doing the journey mapping, there's phases and there's a lot of methodologies around how to actually perform a mapping exercise. Is just remembering when you get into it that we're talking about living human beings that feel and hear and experience something. Once you start putting ticks on a map, if you keep that in mind, it definitely helps the process overall to actually just think about it differently when you start getting into it. the technology question can help, and it can be very complicated, right? So what we start with typically, if we're talking, we'll talk about when we're talking to CMOs, we start talking about the engagement or the experiences through all of the different phases, right? From awareness to conversion to delivery, service, and win back. When you're going through it, looking at the touch points, but then you have to start getting into it a little bit deeper, right? What are the customer goals? What are those touch points? What are the experiences with that? But then beyond the communication mechanism, how are they experiencing the product and the service? Is the product and the service paying off what you're promising everybody in the marketplace? And then where technology fits in is there the infrastructure in place to actually make it the best experience that it could be, whether it's personalization within a marketing campaign, or is it the experience with the product overall? So it could become way beyond marketing or MarTech. It becomes infrastructure and the experience all the way through the supply chain. So I think when you're doing the exercises and you're going through the broad customer journey map, you can, and I'll go back to Kevin, you can definitely go down a rabbit hole, right? When you start really getting into all of the multiple experiences within those phases. So kind of doing that full journey and then really prioritizing where your biggest opportunity areas are or pain points for the customers are, so you can prioritize those and then take a step at a time, or else you're gonna be boiling that ocean.
Yeah. Lynda, thank you very much for that. Tabra, let me ask you, move on to you. And, needless to say, all of you guys come with this mounds and mounds of financial services expertise, not only marketing, but financial services. So I'm going to ask you, Tabra, is financial services as a vertical, is it particularly germane to the, and I'll say to the exercise of journey mapping, but also to the benefits and the end results of journey mapping?
I think particularly in our space where we work with clients who are in a B2B environment, journey mapping is especially valuable. The buying cycles are longer, they're more complex, they're online and offline, and try as hard as we may, silos exist across businesses, and they're almost impossible to eradicate entirely. And so on the customer's side of their experience, one company, one offering, but there are lots of different people behind each of those touch points and lots of different teams. So, particularly given the complexity of the buying cycle, the length of the buying cycle, and the number of people involved in the buying cycle, and obviously we want to map more than just the buying cycle itself, but the whole lifetime of the client or the customer. But that's particularly valuable because actually innovation, improvement in client experience is always rooted in understanding. And that is exactly what customer journey maps are all about. Building and driving understanding in order to drive forward enhancement.
Yeah.
We're all tired. We're all time poor. We all have less energy than we wished we had. So if there was one way that we could improve the lives of our customers and sort of bask in our own glory of being able to, having done so, improve that relationship, it is reducing the amount of effort that it takes to be a customer, reducing the amount of time it takes to become a customer, to get to know the information they want to know, all of those things. So, from my perspective, customer journey mapping is always a starting point, certainly never the end point, and it's especially valuable in complex buying cycles and complex businesses. And B2B, I think, is particularly valuable.
Do you often, Tabra, I mean, you mentioned this is the starting point. Is that really where it starts with you? If you take on a new client, I mean, is that pretty much step one of the first meeting?
It's certainly for particular projects, certainly when we're looking at websites, for example, we need to be thinking about people who aren't yet clients, who are currently clients, who are potentially thinking about not being a client anymore, understanding that whole sort of who are all the different types of people that are going to be coming to the website, and how do we need to service them well with one space, one website, and sometimes that's a mix of audiences and regions as well. So getting a really good handle on, what are all the different stages that people can be at and what are their experiences through all those stages is critical to serving them with the right information at the right moment. That's when you add value. Is I was just looking for that and now I've found it. And now I feel reassured because these guys know what they're doing and I feel like I can trust them. those are the types of feelings that we want to evoke through all of that. So, it's a really important seed to drive decisions from, it plants the understanding and the ideas.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that, Tabra. Jeff, let me move on to you, if I may. Building on some of Tabra's points, is it job one when you take on a new client? Is it of that highest level importance to start with journey mapping or something approximating that? And then I guess the double-barreled part of this question is, we're all brilliant agency people. I'll actually exclude myself. You all are, so this. But do you ever get pushback from clients, particularly new clients, that this is the way we should go, that we should really, start talking about the map of the customer, or are they perhaps a little bit more not understanding of that? Jeff?
No, I mean, I think that the customer journey mapping is probably one of the most important aspects, and it's where we start. I think the client generally has something in mind as well when they come up with a new business goal or business strategy that they want to have X amount of whatever at the end of the some KPI reached. I guess obviously mapping all of the touch points is incredibly important, and segmenting. One thing that we've found too is just making sure that we can actually sort of track all of these touch points, that we can track all of these goals, that we can have accurate analytics at the end of the campaign, and that all of the pipes are connected between all of the various technologies involved. It's something that may not, it's not that fun to talk about, but making sure that you have your systems connected, all of your pipes connected, all of the tracking in place to be able to actually achieve at the end your customer journey goals. And that's definitely one point that I'd like to that we emphasize. It's just, okay, it's great that we have this visual customer map. We know our channels, we know our all of the goals that we want to reach, but can we actually show results at the end? And that's we try to bring that up at the forefront too, because if you bring that up a little bit later at the end, it's like, whoa, then the campaign goes to waste to some degree if you're not able to prove results. And the other aspect of that too is having accurate sort of real-time analytics and tracking allows you to optimize the experience in almost real time and react faster. So being able to figure out that something isn't working and pivot as quickly as possible, either with new channels, new strategies, new creative messaging, that becomes incredibly important to the sort of the real life customer journey. I mean, when you're actually in the middle of it. Yeah, I think I'd say I just wanted to bring up the sort of more technical.
That's a really important part to this, and if I may, well, echoing your sentiments, it goes hand in glove with the idea of sitting down and establishing a customer journey. Is okay, what does success look like? If I may summarize, I think your feelings is to have different benchmarks along the way. Not only does it help establish your role with your client, in terms of what you are doing and what you are doing well, but it also helps you repair the road work if something, where is something breaking down, right? It might not be at the 9th mile, it might be at mile 3 or something like that for you to repair. Yeah,
and the other, it's a living journey. I mean, in finance, things can change overnight. Things can, who knows? I mean, so many different things can happen. If the market's tank, something else comes up like that sort of interferes with the original strategy. Being able to pivot to those, changes as quickly as possible becomes important in a lot of cases. Being able to react to the mood and mindset of the customer as well, we find it extremely important. especially in finance. And this is really one area that we do excel at because we have so much financial data in addition to sort of, typical advertising data. We're able to change messaging around just automatically in terms of like, if the market was to tank 5%, we can change an asset manager's ads around to make sure you have this ETF to hedge against this market condition going forward. And so that becomes sort of a living part of the customer journey. I mean, it's all important. I mean, it's all important to have everything consistent across that journey. But those are just some of the unique aspects that we found to be successful.
Yeah. Jeff, thank you very much for that input. Kevin Hearn, let me ask you to expand on this a little bit about continuing Jeff's thread about the importance of metrics and measurement, and how an agency such as yourself puts them into place, and what are some of the caveats that marketers and their agencies should look for when measuring success?
I mean, measuring success depends a lot on the setup of the client, to be honest, to a certain extent, and what technology and support they have to track and measure. I mean, as an agency, we are kind of feeding the customer journey. We're feeding the funnel, as opposed to actually hitting the trigger on content going live. So, to a certain extent, we are pretty much beholden on the MarTech that they're using, or the agency that they're using to deliver us with those metrics. But yeah, of course, we monitor them. We always we're A/B testing content as it's being issued. We're tracking as things are performing against where we'd expect them to perform, and adapting and changing as we go along. So yeah, it's an essential part of optimizing any campaign. But I just wanted to go back to sort of an earlier point around where customer journey mapping comes into the process, because for us, I think it's slightly different. We when it comes early, but actually, we start with what are we trying to achieve, then it's okay. So how do we have a what do we want to say about this, and how do we have a unique voice in this space? And, who are we talking to? Who are they? And it's only once we have a clear sense of what it is that we want to say that we actually then start to think about, okay, how do we take this to our audience? How do we where are they congregating? How can we communicate with them? How can we then help structure our comms to them in a way that helps guide them through the funnel, which is obviously what all customer journey mapping is trying to do. So for us, I'd say it comes sort of towards the middle, the end of the strategic planning phase.
Yeah. Kevin Hearn, you mentioned a key word, which is optimization. And, don't let me put words in your mouth, but I'm of the impression that, the idea of a customer journey map is a dynamic, ever-changing kind of thing. Could you speak to me about, or us, about how one optimizes what is a customer journey map, and that it, and how you go about adapting to circumstances, especially as Jeff pointed out, financial's crazy, how do you adjust and adapt?
Yeah, to be honest, we don't often have to, huge events are not frequent or common enough that we have to adjust massively. It's more a case of, for us, it's more a case of assessing, what creative is working, what language is working, what elements of the message are working, and tweaking that. Obviously, external events can impact on that, but actually, most of what we're doing is more talking around, what a brand does and how a brand thinks, and I think when it comes to optimization, I'm more talking around testing the effectiveness of the creative that we're creating, that we're developing.
Yeah, I understand. Kevin, thank you very much for that. Tabra, let me move to you, if I may. One asset manager who I've spoken to recently, she was telling me that it is not unusual or it's established in their protocol that a potential customer will have up to 65 different touches, all right, with their company before any sort of mention about customerhood may come into the picture. And I guess my question is, does that surprise you? And maybe explain your answer.
Sure. I like the data came into the question. That's great. A hard number. So I think as marketers, we all sometimes get a little bit sick of our own brand. I mean, less so us being on the agency side, we see a good mix of them. But I think, it's really easy as in-house marketers to get a little bit fatigued of your own brand. And it's easy to forget that actually no one sees it anywhere near as much as we do. And even then, not always consciously. I think the number referenced is it's a big number. It should feel like a big number. But not that surprising, particularly when you think about the longer buying cycles and all the different channels that we're present in, the small mentions, the big mentions, the touch points you own, the touch points that you don't, the sort of significant moments, and maybe even the subconscious impressions. There's lots of, it's a real mix. And that's why, you kind of start with impressions and the high level stuff, and then you get deeper and deeper into the engagement before they may be thinking of you as a potential firm they're interested in. I would love to spend a moment, if I can, just talking a little bit around, the optimization, the concept of optimization and customer journey mapping, if I may.
Sure, please.
So, I think there's a view out there that, you should only ever really map a journey with a real purpose in mind. And, most of the time I'm of that view as well. But I do think that, we have slightly less tangible, more ambiguous buying cycles certainly in the investment management world than certain other sort of straight up, direct to consumer products. And so, certainly in terms of the overall map, I think is helpful to do a really high level. Here's our zoom out. Here's our, just the fundamentals, the basics, don't overwhelm with detail. And then what we find helpful is zooming in on areas that are problematic or you suspect are problematic. And in terms of optimization, right, when you're looking at that customer journey map, we're mapping the journey, right, not the process. The process is part of the journey, but how people experience that process is what you're trying to understand. And so sometimes you'll know something's problematic just by looking at the process and going, oh, that's a good too many 20 steps that we want them to be doing. Or other times it will be, data inputs, quant on call data pointing to stuff that needs attention. And so not overwhelming yourself with too much detail in your journey map, but just enough, particularly on the zoom in moments, to know where you want to optimize, I think is helpful, like finding that right balance. And then as we've already talked about between us as panelists, they should be living, breathing things that change and reflect, and you add data in, and certainly measuring that success. It's about walking that line as always, isn't it? Just the right things to measure, not being too tempted by having a sea of data at your fingertips in case one number is going to look better than the other. So yeah, those are my thoughts on sort of optimization and measurement as well, if I can jump them in.
Indeed, and Tabra, thank you for chiming in with that too. Kevin Steen, I'll move to you if I may. As we all know, we are just coming out of a year and a half of real social distance, right? And I'm going to say that the way financial firms communicate with their customers, talk to their customers, sell their customers on their services has adapted and changed pretty dramatically in the past year and a half. My question to you is, maybe you comment on that, but then I also want to know what that might mean to customer journey mapping and maybe how things have changed from that perspective in your eyes.
I think most of us would probably agree that was a major silver lining of COVID, with all the hell that everyone kind of went through over the last year and a half. Just the greater adoption of digital really across the board and across the industry, and the change that it has accelerated has been a great thing. And of course that affects the journey and people just or whether they're B2B buyers or certain demographics of B2C, just how they interact with technology and how they're less dependent on whether it's going into a branch or having a in-person conversation with a salesperson. It does sort of turn the whole thing on its head. The other thing, even with, and this is not regardless of COVID, just the rise of so many fintechs in the space and how they're approaching things and how they have started with a blank slate. Just looking at, to Tabra's point, the zoom in and zoom out, the zoom in you can do with the client and really get into the weeds, and you have a lot of data and a lot of kind of inside information. Sometimes it's helpful to do zoom outs of competitors or aspirational, even out of category, just so you can see, wow, this is something we could do here, or this is something that even if you're launching a new product, stay away from this because this doesn't really work. So I think that can be effective as well.
Yeah. I don't want to get too off subject, but I'm gonna say it anyway and ask your opinion on it, Kevin. Do you feel that that marketing has become more important in the marketing / sales relationship between clients and customers in financial service? And maybe you'd speak to that for a second or two.
I think absolutely, and we're all very happy about that. I think it's a much more symbiotic relationship between marketing and sales, and marketing and technology, and I think everyone agree that's a really positive thing. I think there's much more of a dependence and just an embrace of change. We had to do things differently. People that were used to doing things a certain way, virtually everyone was forced to rethink some of these things, and as a result, it kind of increased, in most cases, the importance of marketing and having a seat at the table.
Yeah, and it was sort of a leading question, because I kind of, I agree with you, but forever, and you guys all know what I do for a living, and we've been in business for 20 years, but forever I have been talking to marketers about the particular relationship between marketing and sales, and who wins and who's stronger, and but things really shifted in this last year and a half, and like they never have before. And it's been remarkable to see the empowerment of marketing and the stepping up to the plate. My follow-up question then to you, Kevin, is how has that translated to the agency world? Do you find that your services, your strategic thinking, et cetera, is more in demand than ever?
I think it just may be a different type of relationship. So I think for us, it's not that different because we've always been very connected to sales teams. It just may be how you work with the sales team and how your client is working with the sales team. As I mentioned, that's kind of always been our DNA, is finding that connectivity, but it feels a little bit more natural now. And obviously the fact that it can be more digitally driven is a good thing. Yeah.
Kevin, thank you very much. I'll move to you, Lynda, if I may. And I'm going to ask you to comment or chime in, if you would, on this new relationship, if you buy into that, this new relationship between, I'll say between sales and marketing, but I really mean the new importance of marketing that we seem to notice today. And would you care to lend your thoughts to that? Then I have a follow-up question for you, more specifically to journey mapping.
This is one of my favorite topics, actually, only because the role of marketers has changed so much over the last, well, I'll say 10 years, but I'll say more recently the last 5, but beyond even sales. So just having a bigger influence across the organization. So expanding to product influence, technology decisions, are influencing those decisions being made more than ever before. And we saw that starting, I think, bubbling up in 2010, but even more so than ever before. So when even the exercises of going through the customer journey mapping, it's not even, it might start with a marketing team, but it's a very cross-functional effort. I'll go back to what Tabra was saying before, is you need to make sure cross-functionally that you're working on this together. You could initiate a journey map, but everybody needs to be involved, because these things influence product decisions, product development, communications, data, personalization, AI, that's in your infrastructure. So all of these things, your marketers are now having different conversations than ever before. And I think these committees are even getting broader, which I like actually. So you're seeing more durable teams, I think, being stood up on the enterprise side. And then on top of it, later on, we're in a very highly regulated marketplace, being in financial. So there's a lot of that. Tabra, you said something else before as well that I kind of latched on to. When you're looking at everything in context broader, and then you keep going in, I think Kevin was talking about this as well. It's like it's breathing. It's very organic. So you have to take a outward look, and then you have to start going more focused within those experiences. But this is where the whole measurement starts getting into play as well. So to measure across product, to measure across multiple channels, having the infrastructure and the instrumentation in place is critical, but then also doing multi-touch attribution. You start getting deeper as you move along. So all of these are really, really important, of having the touch points in context with the entire end-to-end journey, because you could be trying to solve for one thing, but the influencing communications or technologies around that. An example is we had we got hired in to do, it was a strategic exercise to move to a customer first strategy. And we had all of these great ideas, a great strategy, great go-to-market plan, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, we actually couldn't start. We did start to implement some things to capture some low-hanging fruit, but at the end of the day, our journey mapping exercise exposed some clear operational shortfalls that we couldn't really implement because of a lack of a centralized data source of truth, or a platform that was connected and integrated properly to actually deploy a more personalized campaign, let alone a whole communication stream. So once you do the exercise, and that's where we started talking about earlier, I think, the prioritization of the efforts, let's shore up those operational shortfalls. Let's help the organization move to a customer first strategy. But what that really means, it takes some change management internally, because you're going to be interviewing multiple teams to contribute to that journey map, because every department is responsible for that journey.
Yeah. Oh, that's an excellent point, Lynda. Thank you very much for that. Let me ask you this. It's sort of a pivot point right now in my questions to you all, and maybe I might move on to this as well with you, Jeff. But are there any common, and I'll call them temptations, when you sit down with a client, right, to talk about their specific journey mapping, right? Are there any common temptations that you would advise some of our viewers to shy away from? Are there, is there a set of things that you might be tempted to do in one way, but you have to remember not to go down that road? Again, this is a little bit of an unfair question, because I didn't tell you guys that I'd be asking this in advance, but anything come to mind that again, would be maybe not a best practice that you've learned through your experience?
Not a best practice. I mean, I guess, always leave time for sort of all of the internal regulations and reviews to occur. So there's always holdups with, disclaimers and other regulatory and legal type things. Other practices to avoid, and specifically to customer mapping, would be, expecting an exact outcome without the client putting in some work on their side. So there always is some work on the client side that's maybe, if the more engaged they are throughout the process, it usually turns out more successful. If they are totally hands off, I'm not, things can tend to maybe drift the way that they might not have been thinking of originally. So, I mean, I definitely like when clients are more hands-on sort of in the customer journey process than hands-off.
Those are great examples. Let me flip it and ask you, what are some key points that you always need to remember when sitting down with your client to effectively map the customer journey?
I would say be open to the unexpected journey. So after you've got this brilliant plan mapped out, you may see a pocket of really high performance in an area that you might not have been planning for. So just being open to changing strategies, to changing the channels that you're using, to changing maybe landing pages out, even simple things like landing pages for registrations, like if those aren't optimized correctly, then it can have drastic results on your end goal. Being able to also if they have a flexible sort of web team, a development team, being able to map to make those types of changes and optimizations to the overall journey on the fly, and in some cases being open to accept that some aspect of the strategy wasn't working initially, and then just being able to iterate and continuously improve upon that. We've always found very important to do.
Yeah, all good points. All good points. Jeff, thank you very much. And let me move on to you, Kevin Hearn, if I may. For the last 20 years, I have been talking about how much media is changing, and I haven't stopped talking about that. But I will say this, that media seems to have changed an awful lot in the last couple of years. All right. And of course, I'm talking about one-to-one media, but I'm also talking about one-to-many media. It just seems that there's been a lot of shifts and a lot of changes brought about by what, among other things. But I want to ask you, how is a change in media potentially, Kevin Hearn, affecting the way customer journey mapping works and functions, and how you think about it with your clients?
Well, obviously, there's a lot more options now, and more options within channels, and so a key part of that is obviously making sure that the formats that you're choosing when you're communicating in the channels are completely aligned with the message and and what you're trying to say. I think I think part for us as a content agency, I think that the shift in or the development of the online channels has led to a glut of content. There is a lot of content now, so and a lot of it's not very good, and a lot of it has not been created with the right purpose in mind. So I think it's important to really think about your content strategically and make sure that you're creating something with relevance and cut through, and that you're not just adding to the noise. I think going back actually to some of Jeffrey's other points and about I think the thing with customer journey mapping is that it's a route to give you the best chance of success, and it's it's a useful guide to help you map your way the customer's journey through the funnel. But people aren't always predictable or working to your timeline, and so you've got to be aware of that and to maintain to stay consistent and to keep communicating even when recognize that these life cycles, these sort of purchase cycles are quite lengthy. But in answer to your actual question, I think it's there's more choice. You need to be more selective, you need to be more precise in your decision making, really sort of know that you can justify your decision making and ensure that you're using these different options effectively.
And to get back to one of the points that we've already spoken about, but specifically to this area of questioning, the metrics and measurement, I assume, are a little bit more complex these days. And I say these days, but lately, is it more difficult because there's more choices about measuring how well you're doing?
Well, I mean, measurement is such a hot potato of a topic. I mean, there's so many layers to that. There's, what data can you trust? What is the true data? What is the data actually telling you? What was your objective in the first place? Is the data that you're reporting actually the right type of data to account for your success? And I think that the certain metrics aren't employed often enough. I mean, a lot of customer journeys can be lengthy. And so I think things like brand trackers and sentiment surveys and that kind of stuff aren't used enough. I think that the first step of the journey is probably the hardest one. It's getting on people's radar, getting and then maintaining your share of mind. When so that when they come to actually make that decision, you're still there. And that part people often sort of skip over. It's just one part of the process. And actually they're more interested in, okay, we've got them, into the funnel now. We can start serving, start talking to them, serving them preference stuff or conversions, content or whatever. But actually, I think one, which is often not invested in enough is that ongoing awareness, keeping yourself in market, keeping yourself top of mind, or at least in mind. And the measurement for that needs to be different. You can't measure that through interactions. It needs to be measured over a period of time and, gauge, changes in sentiment.
Yeah. Kevin, thank you very much for your thoughts on that. Kevin Steen, I'll move on to you, and I'll ask you about where this is all heading. And when I say it that way, I mean, journey mapping, as I think we all agree, has in some way, shape, or form been around for a bit. It hasn't been till the last few years that we've really been talking about it as such. And I might point out that I believe the importance within a marketing team it's become more important to the marketing effort. What's the future of this discipline of marketing, of journey mapping, and where are things heading in the future? Are we going to be relying more and more on it, especially in financial, or might it be more of a fad kind of thing that people seem to be embracing it in such a way?
I think it is here to stay. I think we see even on our clients, where it used to be something we would sell to our clients or encourage them to do, many of them have internal functions now. They've embraced it. Their product teams do it. And then they work with an agency partner perhaps to get more objectivity or to fill in other expertise in certain areas, or work together in partnership on it. So it feels like it's here to stay. It's certainly been embraced, and it's part of the norm and the expectation from what we've seen.
Yeah. And so you feel that we could potentially be talking about this right here, right now, right here in 10 years.
I mean, it's hard to say that, but I think also the need for it to be more flexible, perhaps, and more adaptable. And someone had mentioned earlier, just being able to, it's a living and breathing thing, and making sure that's possible. And just as the pace of change increases, that how we do this and how we measure it and optimize will as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Kevin, very much for that. Tabra, let me move on to you with and this is sort of a how-to question, so forgive me if I seem a little naive, but maybe it'd be helpful for any of those in the audience, who might be wondering the same question. But obviously, some financial firms have, or basically all of them, have different types of customers, right? So when you sit down to talk about customer journey mapping, how do you separate different customers into, and different maps into the overall plan?
Great question, because it's unlikely that one journey is going to be able to represent your entire customer or client base, but that doesn't mean you need to spend months, years building out loads and loads of variants. And I mentioned earlier in the call that we work with clients on segmentation. It's very much the same. A true segment is a segment of one, but that doesn't mean you need to build out a segment for every client that you have. It also reminds me of sort of a bit of a web principle, designed for the 80%, not the 20%. It's okay if your journey map isn't representative of people who maybe do things a little bit differently. It's about getting to the essence of what the majority are probably getting up to. And so, it's about what resource do you have available, and how detailed do you need to get? What is your objective in your mapping? And so, I would certainly suggest not to go too big with too many variants that's not helpful. People don't want a library of journey maps. And I also would encourage you to think about the value in splitting it out. So I would say the fewer the better. This is a tool to get people around the table to get their heads straight about what is the as-is situation today for your customers. And the more complicated you make that, the harder it is for that journey map to be a storytelling tool, a visualization, and just building a little bit on what we've been talking about around getting as many people involved across your organization as possible in this. I know that we're not in the office that much at the moment, but I would certainly encourage this not to be something that you kind of tuck away, save on your desktop, throw in the shared drive somewhere, print it out if you can, get people to come and look at it, drag them in, whack it on a slide and put it in as many meetings as possible, because that is what drives understanding, continually referring back to what the situation is, what you want to change about it, what you've discovered, really kind of like evangelizing your insight.
Yeah.
And so, that's certainly how I would suggest, kind of not only how would you go about it for how many clients you want to focus on, but also how do you make it a thing that people care about? How do you make it a thing that people are going to base their decisions on? Because, the journey map isn't the outcome. It's decision-making and the changes that it drives. So, people won't make decisions if they don't know about it.
So, and again, because I'm having fun with this question here. So process-wise, I think what you're suggesting is this should not necessarily be something that a small team sort of sits in a small room and says, well, let's look at this data, and these are our 6 different customer types, and let's map this. But it's more of an iterative kind of like, let's open this up in the huge conference room and let's get everybody thinking. Am I correct in that?
Absolutely, because actually the value in customer journey mapping is not at the end. It's the process, it's the understanding, it's the dusting off the cobwebs on the assumptions or throwing them out the window because they were wrong.
Yeah.
And you only get to that if you get a sort of a broad range of views, a broad opportunity to pull in data, be that anecdotal from distribution, sales or servicing teams. You're going to get data from everywhere. Don't overlook the people who you sit around the corner virtually even.
Yeah.
But yeah, it should almost feel like, the process should almost feel like an exhibition. People can come and get involved in, visit, share thoughts. They don't know, it doesn't always have to be an all-day workshop where everyone has to give up a whole day in order to, offer their pearl of wisdom.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Tabra. Now we are running low on time, but I want to ask your opinion, if I may, Lynda, on that very subject about the process. And do you agree, or do you does it ring familiar to you as Tabra described it, what the process should be and why?
Yeah, I would build on it a bit, only because I think depending on where the organization's at, if it's the first time they're doing a customer journey map, absolutely. Get a foundational, I think, document in place. I do like to work with personas, taking the segments that she talked about and fleshing those out, because I think when you look at a journey map through the lens of a certain persona, it will change based on that segment when you look at it through those lenses. So I think that your journey maps could be, I don't think don't boil the ocean. This goes back to the boiling the ocean, but making sure that you're looking at that journey map through the lens of the persona in context, because some of those touch points would change. So I think that if you have a foundational document, you can start building on that based on those different lenses, because it certainly, for us, it definitely changes and it helps guide the strategy for each experience.
Yes. Yeah. Lynda, thank you for that. And then Jeffrey, I'll give you this sort of the final point, and I'll ask you from a process point of view, meaning the process of laying out a customer journey map, what might you have to add to this, or might you agree with what we've just heard, or anything to add to it?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this is finance. This is we're talking people's money. It's a big part of their life. Their investment decisions, their selection of a financial advisor. If you're an institutional, if you're buying this other company, there is a lot of sort of mood and mindset and sentiment involved in all of this, and being able to capture some of that sentiment as well, and layer that onto your personas. I mean, maybe you're looking for, you know, an investor interested in ESG companies. And then if you're able to, you know, change some messaging around based on what's going on, either contextually or behaviorally, or you know, what the actual sort of securities, how they're performing, being able to personalize that whole sort of crafting that messaging too is maybe one part that has been missing. So the dynamic changing of messaging based on all of these factors that I just talked about, sort of with a very cohesive and consistent brand surrounding that, all the way from, you know, your channel outreach, whether that's, you know, or display or mobile, to the landing page, to the actual sort of experience or end product goal. You know, being able to keep that consistent, but then also able to keep in mind sort of that, you know, this is people's money that we're talking about, and they're going to have different feelings at different points in their both immediate aspects in their life. Sort of that life journey is another core part. And then, you know, after you've captured sort of that user's attention, being able to recommend them additional products, all of that, you know, goes into the overall living and breathing customer journey.
Sure. Well, listen, A, thank you very much, Jeff, for those comments. B, I am afraid we have reached the end of our time together. There you have it, folks. Everything you ever wanted to know about customer journey mapping in financial, but we're afraid to ask, has been incorporated into our time together. I really do thank you all very much. I mean, really, it's very clear to me, and I'm sure panelists, it's clear to you all what great company each one of you is sitting in, because truly this has been a fast-moving and truly informative session together. I am certain our audience feels the same. I can't thank you enough. And I also wish to thank our sponsors again, Dinomi, Investing Channel, and Additions Financial, our very own Kevin Hearn down below, for your participation and your support of this kind of education for our industry. Again, thank you all. This is truly Agency Brilliance. We will see you next time. Thank you for joining us.